Thank you for your attendance. Welcome to the Committee on Budget and Fiscal Review. We're going to get started. I understand our Republican colleagues are just finishing their briefing, so we believe we can begin. Our first item of business will be going over the Prop 98 package, so we won't be taking any actions until, of course, they join us. But get some of our housekeeping out of the way. See, we have full attendance today. There will be public comment after each presentation of each section so that we will get to hear from you before we take any actions on any of the items before us. And I would be remiss if I did not make my first comments in thanks and appreciation to our budget subcommittee chairs and all of our subcommittee members who for the past almost half year have been meeting regularly to go over every line item of the governor's proposed January budget this past week, reviewing the changes made in the revision, and allowing us to get to our work here today. It's a lot of hard work, many, many long hearings with a lot of public comment. That's our process. It's inclusive, and I say thank you to everyone. The governor's May revision of his January proposal is a positive, effective, and thoughtful continuation of our efforts to reinvest in the needs and the people of California. The budget package that we're going to hear today represents a comprehensive approach in restoring essential educational, social service, health, and other programs while maintaining the state's solid fiscal outlook. This Senate plan provides funding for many critical priorities, especially in the areas of child care, human services, and higher education. The architecture of our budget begins with much of the governor's base level funding, but makes some distinctive and important changes in program spending, reflecting Senate Democratic Caucus priorities. The centerpiece of it is reinvestment in the state's child care and early learning system. Our proposal returns child care to Prop 98, recognizing that high-quality care and early learning interventions are a fundamental component of the educational process. The plan provides $330 million for increased reimbursement rates, along with nearly 17,500 slots with a focus on infants and toddlers. This initiative works well with the governor's proposed earned income tax initiative, earned income tax credit, which provides a refundable tax credit for low-income wage earners and, like child care, supports our working families. In K through 14 education, the Senate plan for Prop 98 provides about $900 million more for K-14 than the governor's May revision. $800 million for educator quality and effectiveness. That's about $2,700 per teacher or administrator. $50 million more for adult education, which would bring it to a total of around $500 million, and augments the governor's proposed mandates, Common Core, and other state-adopted content standards and local control funding formula payments. The Senate Higher Education Plan maximizes the state's dollars by opening up opportunities for Californians. It will increase UC's enrollment for California residents and approves the governor's proposal to pay down UC pension costs. It increases UC non-resident tuition and redirects non-resident institutional aid to expand academic quality and fully funds UC labor centers. In addition to approving the governor's CSU augmentation, the Senate's higher education plan increases enrollment, support services, and course sections. It also establishes graduation incentive grants, redirects the governor's innovative grant funds to deferred maintenance, and to revive the eligibility study. It also restores Cal Grant cuts for students in private nonprofit colleges and increases the number of competitive Cal Grant awards. The Senate plan also makes critical investments in social services. First, by restoring the 7% cut in hours and implementing overtime payments for IHSS. Also by eliminating the maximum family grant provision for CalWORKs and delaying the 24-month clock. By providing an additional $15 million so qualified organizations can assist individuals eligible under the President's executive actions on immigration. And by setting aside funds to begin work on establishing a larger health program for undocumented persons under Medi-Cal and providing funds for dental rate increases and the restoration of optional benefits. And lastly, by approving additional community resources associated with developmental center closures and funds targeted and much needed rate increases. The Senate plan also reduces caseloads in dependency court cases and provides some additional funding for previously authorized judicial appointments and provides relatively small but very vital augmentations for other programs such as support for libraries, the Arts Council, and natural resources programs. Based on the LAO's revenue assumptions, the Senate plan includes more debt pay down, more reserves, and more critical investments for rebuilding California. I think we could all agree on at least one thing, that the needs of our state will always outpace the resources that we have to meet them. But I feel really confident that this proposal is a major step in the right direction. So with that, we're going to begin with the Prop 98 package, and I invite up the Department of Finance to please join us. And rather than take all the time it would take, and with regard to time, this is a holiday weekend, and everything that we're hearing today has been heard in subcommittee, so nothing is new. I want to give full respect to the importance of everything that we're talking about today, but as I mentioned, with the holiday weekend, colleagues have about one chance, and that's the one they're holding, to get back to their districts. And so I want to be respectful of that. And to the degree that we can each individually be respectful of the collective need in our own questions and comments, I would really like to set a goal of having concluded with all our public comment by 3:30. So let's just all keep an eye on the clock, as I will certainly be doing so. So Ms. Bosler, welcome, and great to see you again.
Good morning, Keely Bosler with the Department of Finance. It's my pleasure to be here before you today. I'll just start out, since we are starting with Proposition 98, and Proposition 98 is based on your revenue assumption. I just want to say that while we do appreciate there's considerable common ground between the administration, the governor's May revision proposal and the budget proposals that you're putting forward here today, we do continue to maintain that building the budget on speculative revenues, highly volatile revenues, is not a prudent thing to do. As the state's finances continue to be balanced over the forecast period only precariously, and actually in 2018-19, we do end up with a $2.5 billion operating deficit. And there continues to be a lot of risks that we see to the forecast over that period. So our commitment is to continue to build a budget that's based on revenues that will be realized, and so that we aren't building programs that we then have to cut and return to the boom and bust cycles of this past decade.
And we certainly have had this conversation every year for the past 4 years, and I won't review all the numbers that would suggest whose estimates have been more accurate, but we get your point, you get ours. And I thought maybe the best way to approach it is for you to highlight some of the major differences between the revision and our proposal.
Sure, and I'll turn that over to Jeff Bell to do that.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair and members. Thanks for the opportunity to do that. There are a couple key points we noted in the Proposition 98 guarantee when the additional revenues are put forth as part of the proposal. We note that it's about a $1.7 billion difference in the guarantee when the Senate revenues are taken into consideration. As a result of that, there's a number of key changes in the Senate proposal as compared to the one that we provided in the May revision. A couple key areas, of course, one of the major ones that you highlighted in your opening remarks is the child care is brought back within the Proposition 98 guarantee. That results in both the existing program coming within the guarantee and then several $100 million in additional child care components that I think are going to be a part of the additional conversation that you'll be having as part of the key highlighted items as this conversation continues. So I'll allow that to be part of the conversation that's going to ensue following these overview remarks, because in the interest of time. One other key area that we did notice was in the area of county property taxes being part of the local control funding formulas, excess tax, 100% level. This proposal allows for the full inclusion of those excess taxes to be included as part of the match. What is currently happening now within the LCFF is that districts and county offices are coming up to about 53%. By including it to 100%, the existing proposal also increases the amount of the Prop 98 guarantee. This proposal provides additional resources for that. If those resources don't come true, however, what would occur is essentially a crowding out, if you will, of other areas or other districts that are not basic aid in nature. If you could look at it as an analogy of a bucket, the excess tax in the basic aid districts would take up more of that space, and the districts that are non-basic aid in nature would get less of that LCFF funding. So that's another key area. In the area of the community colleges, there are a couple key areas that we did notice, several programs that were added in terms of EOPS being one of them. We note that we have several investments in that area that we think cover those components, and we would note that in particular student equity, this year we had $70 million in that program. We're adding another $115 million in our budget. We think that those resources can be used to cover all those needs, and we think it's a very significant additional investment. Those are some of the key highlights.
All right. Then we'll proceed to page 5. Sorry. Excuse me. I want to come back to 1 and 2, but let's start on 3, please.
This is the adult education block grant proposal. This is a proposal that we made in our January budget to really infuse the adult education programs that were cut significantly during the recession. Our proposal in the May revision was changed significantly to change the structure of how the monies would be allocated from before we had set up a allocation board, and so in the May revision, we did modify our proposal to have the consortia be the allocating body, and that they continue, though, to work with the diverse stakeholders that are different in every region of the state that are serving the adult education, providing adult education. We note that there are 2 different modifications that the staff is recommending. We do not have a lot of details on the data piece, and so at this point are not supportive, but would like to continue conversations on that. We generally have been in opposition of building large new data systems. We do have several existing systems, and so building another new system would be a concern to us. And then assuming the second bullet has a lot to do with accountability, but we don't have all the details on that at this point.
Vallejo.
Natasha Collins, Legislative Analyst Office.
We note that there are various improvements to the adult education proposal that was put forth in May by the administration, some that Ms. Bosler mentioned, including a strengthening of governance and accountability, especially pertaining to the allocation boards. In addition, there's now a requirement that there be public meetings and feedback from other stakeholders in those adult education regions. We also feel that the proposal better incorporates other adult education funding, which was one of our concerns with the original proposal, in that it requires each consortium's plan to reflect all funding for adult education and workforce training in the region. And there's various other improvements. However, there is some room for improvement. We are concerned because the proposal limits the consortia's ability to respond to changes in regional demand because it essentially locks in individual provider funding levels year over year. There are very narrow circumstances under which these funding levels could be rearranged. We think that this limits the flexibility of local providers to serve the adults in their region flexibly. There's also some details missing from the governor's proposal, including specific program goals and effectiveness measures. It also does not provide the legislature with prior notice to the allocation and what method would be used to deliver funds to regional consortia. In order to address these concerns, we first recommend rejecting statutory language that would lock in those funding levels I mentioned. We would just note that the purpose of this consortia effort was to increase the state's flexibility to meet these needs for adult education in each region, and this would be limiting their ability to do that. We also recommend developing clear performance measures and effectiveness measures based on the local plans that the state receives. Also to require notice of the allocations to the legislature so you can approve them, the allocation method. And lastly, we recommend setting a deadline for the adoption of consistent adult education policies, specifically student assessment, accountability, that includes student identifiers, and student fees as a condition of funding to CDE and the Chancellor's office. I'll now provide a brief overview of what the staff recommendation pertaining to the adult education block grant is. The staff recommends approving the $500 million block grant in Prop 98 General Fund and approving placeholder language that addresses the role of adult education in the future and also addresses the timeline for the distribution of adult education funds. The staff recommendation also requires compliance with guidelines for assessment, evaluation, and data collection as a condition of funding to consortia. Lastly, it would also ensure that consortia is meeting the needs of the state in the areas of basic skills to ensure that adults are able to enter the workforce. Thank you.
Could you talk to us a little bit about the dynamic between the governor's grant proposals and the, I'm sorry. One second. We're going to break just for a moment and establish our quorum.
Leno,
Here.
Nielsen,
Here.
Allen, Anderson, Bell, Block, Hancock, Mitchell, Monning, Morlock, Wynn, Pan, Pavley, Roth, Stone, Woke. We have a quorum.
Just briefly. And I understand there are some slight differences between our proposal and the Assembly, so this is an item that will be going to conference. Senator Block, just briefly from your subcommittee.
Yeah, just briefly, the subcommittee really appreciates the changes in the May revision. The governor was responsive to many of the concerns that came up during subcommittee meetings. We're still concerned about two issues that will be addressed, we hope, as this moves down the process. Those are the governance factors, exactly how this pot of money is going to be governed and allocated, and finally the accountability, which is present in the staff recommendations. But again, we thank the governor's office for working with us.
Thank you, Senator. And I will take that as motion of the staff recommendation.
It is. So moved.
Colleagues, any comments or thoughts? Senator Roth.
I appreciate this effort. My only concern always has been, and continues to be, as we move money down to the local level, that as a state that we design appropriate accountability measures, goals and objectives, and performance metrics. So to that extent, I certainly align myself with the comments of the LAO, and I hope that as we do this, recognizing that we don't need to build new levels of bureaucracy or extensive groups of employees doing bean counting, so to speak. I do think we need to hold folks accountable for the money that they receive. We need to make sure that they set appropriate goals and objectives with respect to this sort of effort, whether it's certified nursing assistance programs or other English as a second language program. They need to identify what their objectives are, and they need to measure whether they accomplish them, and if they don't, then perhaps we need to design some method of making adjustments. I know you all are working on it, so thank you for the effort. Appreciate it. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Nielsen.
Mr. Chairman, on this point, I would echo the sentiments of Senator Roth about accountability. Too often, the legislature just leaves this open-ended, that there's no accountability. There are many areas I could speak to where it's been rampant over decades and institutionalized. I tend to abstain on this right now because we have not seen any actual language. It would be best basically voting on concept, and I don't like to do that.
Certainly. Understood. And again, given that we don't have the details yet, this will be worked out in the week as we move to conference. Any other questions? If not, so the motion is then to approve the $500 million and also to approve placeholder trailer bill language to address the role of adult education in the consortium. Call the roll, please.
That's issue 3, page 5. Leno?
Aye.
Leno, aye. Nielsen?
Abstain.
Allen? Allen, aye. Anderson? No. Anderson, no. Bell? Bell, aye. Block? Block, aye. Hancock? Hancock, aye. Mitchell? Aye. Mitchell, aye. Monning? Aye. Monning, aye. Morlock? Wynn? Pan? Aye. Pan, aye. Pabley? Pabley, aye. Roth? Aye. Roth, aye. Stone? Woke? Aye. Woke, aye. That's 11-1.
So that it passes 11-1. And we'll go back to page 3 for the first issue, which is career tech education.
Yes, this is a proposal that we made in our January budget that we modified at the May revision, and that's to provide $400 million in the first year for competitive career tech education incentive grants. This is really in recognition that these programs are very expensive to start up or to modify or modernize, and additional monies are needed to do that. But the idea is that over time, the base funding that's provided through the LCFF will be the funding that runs these programs ongoing. So this money, that's $400 in the budget year, $300 in budget year +1, and then $200 in budget year +2, would be really used to transform and modernize career technical education programs around the state, with the hopes of developing modern, good programs that can really help lead these students to careers after they finish high school.
Thank you. Leo?
I'd like to ask some questions.
Sure, right.
The legislative proposal aligns with the governor's in that it provides one-time Prop 98 funds in $400 million in the first year, so budget year, 300 budget year plus 1, 200 million budget year plus 2. However, it changes it in that would no longer be a competitive grant, and the money would instead be distributed based on high school average daily attendance. It would require, as a condition of receiving funds, that recipients develop a plan including a sequence of courses that are aligned with CTE, with high CTE standards, and also articulate with community college CTE courses and apprenticeship programs. It also would require a system for data collection. It would require certification of plan development with an industry-based advisory board. It would need to be certified as aligning with Common Core standards where applicable. It would also require certified CTE instructors and collect as much data as possible as needed to hold the programs accountable. It eliminates the match requirement that is in the governor's proposal for receipt of the grants or of the ADA apportionment. And it also specifies that programs operated by joint powers agencies are eligible to receive these funds as if they were local education, with the consent of local education agencies. Thank you.
And what is the LAO's take on the difference between the ADA approach and the grants?
The ADA approach would be non-competitive, so it has the potential to open up grants to those that may not otherwise be competitive. So with a competitive grant approach, you would probably have school districts and other LEAs that are competitive and able to apply for those programs, receive the grants, whereas with an ADA approach, it would be open to all.
So the concern might be that...
high school ADA,
yes,
by the way, 9 through
right.
12.
So that those districts that have may get more, those that have fewer resources to be able to compete might get less.
That might be one possibility.
So one argument for the ADA approach is a greater opportunity for equity. Do you think the details that the legislative proposal have included, as you've already noted, the 5 different details, are sufficient to make sure that we wouldn't be investing in programs that aren't going to be providing the quality that we're looking for to get to our goal?
I can't say definitively, but many of the requirements here are consistent with how we typically classify high-quality programs, high-quality CTE programs.
Fair enough. Yes, Senator Stone.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for your presentation. Using the ADA formula, would you not agree that smaller school districts would have a lack of opportunity when there's probably a fixed cost to provide this technical opportunity for their students? And I represent an area that has large school districts and has small school districts, and I want to make sure that those small school districts also have an opportunity, which happen to be in more rural areas where we see a little bit more unemployment, especially in the Coachella Valley. Is it going to provide equal opportunities for all these kids, or is it going to be pretty much, if you live in a metropolitan area with a large school district, they're going to get the big chunk of funding at the expense of smaller districts?
Well, the ADA would go out to students in the same way. We estimate it would be about $250 per student, per high school student in the first year, then ramp down a bit in the next 2 years because the Prop 98 funding is lower. Yes, smaller rural districts would receive less of that ADA, but how we've approached CTE in the past has been more on a regional basis with regard to smaller districts. So the hope would be that there would be economies of scale built in areas with less students, so we can have more efficient programs. So the pooling of money would allow for that.
But isn't it true that there's going to be a baseline investment? As an example, you put together a computer lab. Okay, whether you've got 25 students or you have 50 students, you're still going to have to buy 15 computers, and those that are in larger districts are going to be able to easier make that expenditure rather than small districts that may not get the kind of money to get 15 computers. So it seems to me this is a boon to the larger districts at the expense of smaller districts, and I want to make sure that pupils in smaller districts have the same opportunities for career technical education, which I'm a strong proponent of, Mr. Chairman. I think it's wonderful that we're doing this because not everybody wants to go to college. Or what we found in at least the city of Temecula, we adopted a program that required kids to do shadowing. It actually got a national award. And the side effect of this program was that kids that were shadowing at places like International Rectifier in my district, at Professional Hospital Supply, at Abbott Vascular, these kids were not only incentivized to get trade technical education, but as a side effect, they went to college because they said, you know, I want to be a medicinal engineer. It was a wonderful attribute to a program that would not have been inspired without that technical exposure to those jobs. So I hope that the committee will reconsider the allocation formula.
Thank you, Senator Stone. Senator Pan.
Thank you. I do. So I have a question actually regarding. So in the governor's proposal, basically what it said is that there's going to be a pool of money, there's going to be competitive grants. You have to meet the criteria to get the grants, right? And there isn't. Is there a specific language about how many grants are distributed at all?
Ian Johnson, Department of Finance. We acknowledge that the allocation of this funding has to be done in a thoughtful way, and so we didn't prescribe how many grants or what the award or amounts are. Rather, we put authority with the superintendent of public instruction in collaboration with the governor to collectively come together and determine that.
Okay. And and just for the LAO, I heard in your testimony you said, you know, because we're now talking about in the legislative proposal per high school average daily attendance, and you said, well, hopefully we can get quality because we have these criteria. Is there anticipated what happens when the school doesn't quite meet those criteria or kind of barely, or, I mean, is that going to be an issue in terms of quality? From your perspective, what happens to the money if a school district actually doesn't put together a program that meets the quality standards? Is that getting redistributed to everybody else, or do they still get their allocation? How's that work?
It would be as a condition of receiving funds to meet these criteria, but in the event that these criteria aren't met, there hasn't been specific language put forth to address that.
So I would say, so it sounds to me like if you don't meet the criteria, actually, then we should think about redistributing to the ones that do. We want to maximize the use of the funds, right? So that sounds like we're going back into a competitive process. Would be the better way.
Yes, I think our approach was really built at transforming, building new, really modernizing existing programs. You know, the ADA approach, which we are opposed to, I think really, it does distribute the money to all of the students. That is a benefit, but it also dilutes it because it doesn't really provide any one school district with enough money, unless they pair it with their base funds, to really build a new program or even modernize an existing program. So ours is really targeted to rural school districts and also regions of the state that have very high dropouts, dropout rates. And this targeted approach is really about propelling career tech forward, building really high quality new programs that are designed for modern careers.
So, and every school district can avail themselves of applying for the money. So, I mean, we have an equity thing there where everyone has an opportunity, but they need to meet certain quality standards and so forth, correct, under the process? Okay. Yeah, I mean, I think I do have concerns about just distributing the funds without, I mean, I think with the accountability piece that I'm hearing in the more competitive process also, I mean, this is just over a period of time where it eventually gets phased out, and hopefully every school district builds it in. But I think what we want to do is be sure that the school districts that get the money have the resources, and I heard what Senator Stone said, to be able to actually do a robust program. And if they can't prove they can do it, I'm a little concerned that we're going to be sort of spreading the money out in ways that may not actually allow certain districts to actually do something. I mean, they'll get the money, but they're not going to be able to actually, and at the same time, we're not, you know, there may be even districts that haven't been investing, and maybe they're not quite up to par quite yet, and yet we're diluting the money out. So I do have some concerns about that. I've heard also from districts in my own, school districts within my own Senate district that have invested in career tech, and they are concerned about this dilution. So I'm interested in hearing about further discussion, but I'm not hearing answers to the issue about, well, we just take the money and just spread it out. Are we really going to get the kind of benefit that we're hoping to get from this money? I mean, it'd be great if we could get more, but I think we have limited resources.
If I could just
Please, go ahead.
add one comment pertaining to accountability. This would not be the only accountability that requires school districts to offer career and technical education. Within the local control and accountability plans, the provision of career technical education and other outcomes that career technical education can lead to are part of those local accountability plans. Moreover, the academic performance index, although it's kind of in flux right now, one of the areas that we're planning to include, that the state is planning to include in the API is college and career readiness, as well as test scores. So just to add that point.